The truth about progressive overload is that it is commonly misunderstood and misapplied. And I fell into this trap too of kind of misapplying this principle of progressive overload. So I think that when a lot of people think about progressive overload, what comes to their mind is that in any given workout, they need to do more than they did previously to cause an adaptation to occur. And I think that this is not the best way of thinking about how progressive overload works. And I think that this can lead you to just making overall less progress over time and potentially even leading you to stalling out a little bit quicker. So let me first discuss why I think this is a problem, and then I'll discuss the better way to kind of think about progressive overload, or what I think is the better way to think about it. So the problem with thinking that you need to do more every single workout is that that's probably going to lead you to just trying to do more and more weight or more reps every workout, even when it's not appropriate to do so. So this could be in the context of you might throw out your form a little bit and might give up some of your like really good technique to just lift more weight. I know that's definitely what I did when I was kind of misapplying this principle. And what that leads to is on any given set, you're just giving yourself more kind of overall fatigue and less muscle stimulus. And if you're making the trade-off for more fatigue and less stimulus, that's most definitely going to lead to less results over time. And I think it's better to think about how can I get the most amount of stimulus on a per set basis for my target muscle group with the least amount of fatigue. And by thinking that you need to do more every single workout, it can definitely lead you down the path of just kind of throwing out your form a little bit and just leading yourself to having more fatigue and less stimulus on a per set basis. So that's one potential issue with it. Another potential issue with it is that it can lead you down a path in which you're just kind of digging yourself in a hole of recovery. And you're not ever actually recovering from your training because you're trying to do more every single workout. So you might be trying to do more volume every single workout, or you're doing several more reps, or you're training closer to failure, or you're subjectively just like pushing yourself harder and training harder every workout. And I'm not saying that it's a bad idea to train harder or anything like that, but if you're not recovering from your training and then you think the only way that you're going to cause adaptation is by doing more in your next workout, and then you do more in your next workout and you're already not recovering, well, that's kind of a recipe for never recovering from your training, and recovery is a prerequisite for adaptation to occur. So if you don't recover, you're not going to adapt and make the progress you want. So kind of the two biggest issues I see with this kind of mentality is that it can lead to just a poor stimulus to fatigue ratio on a per set basis because you're kind of throwing out your technique a little bit just to do a little bit more reps, a little bit more weight. And then also it can lead you down a path of just doing more in an absolute sense, whether it's volume or working at lower reps in reserve, different things like that, when you're already under recovered, leading to just lackluster progress. And I know that when I was, first trying to apply this principle and definitely misapplying it, it would lead me to, in my deadlifts, I would choose a deadlift with like the smallest range of motion, and my range of motion would just get smaller and smaller over time because I thought that I needed to lift more weight to cause adaptations to occur. And this led me to just not really getting anywhere when it comes to my kind of muscular development. So what is potentially a better way to think about progressive overload? Well, I think coming back to kind of the definition of progressive overload, I think it's best to think about progressive overload as needing to increase your training stress as adaptations occur. So when an adaptation occurs, you need to up your absolute training just a little bit to facilitate further adaptations. But the key here is when adaptations occur. I think that progressive overload should be based on the time course of how long it takes an adaptation to occur. And then once adaptation takes place, then you are going to need to do a little bit more in an absolute sense to keep stimulating further adaptations to occur. But if you think about muscle growth or even strength, these adaptations take a long time. Like I'm not going to be able to look back just 2 months ago, and I would consider myself maybe a more intermediate trainee. I wouldn't see a visual change in muscle most of the time. So given that, adaptations take a long time for muscle hypertrophy to take place, and even to some extent strength, depending on your strength levels and your goals and your programming and stuff like that. It doesn't make sense to think that you need to do more every single workout, because like the amount of stimulus to cause adaptation in last workout, well, if not many adaptations have occurred from your last workout to this workout, then the amount of stimulus to trigger adaptation probably hasn't changed that much either. So I think what most people mess up about progressive overload is that their time course is just off. They think that every single workout, if they don't do more, they don't cause adaptation. When in reality, I would think about it kind of flipped around, meaning let adaptations occur first. And then once that adaptation occurs, then you up your training stress a little bit to facilitate further adaptations. And then once those adaptations occur, then you can bump your training stress. Now, this doesn't mean that I am against increasing your volume on a weekly basis or anything like that. I actually think that that is still a good idea. However, I don't necessarily think that that is needed for muscle hypertrophy. And if you're taking an approach of where you're scaling volume each week, well, what I care about there is what is your average training stress over that entire mesocycle? And then to apply progressive overload, we want to gradually scale that training stress over time. So you might find that, okay, maybe if you're working from 10 to 20 sets throughout a mesocycle, well, you might consistently work from 10 to 20 sets across the mesocycle over the next, few years of your training. But if you're getting gradually stronger over time, that is still increasing your training stress in an absolute sense across that meso on average. And I think especially when people started thinking about scaling volume on a per week basis, like from Renaissance periodization or some of the ideas of Dr. Mike Israetel, which I still think are good ideas to progressively scale your volume across the meso, but I don't think it's needed. And I don't think the main benefit of that is for progressive overload. I think there's other benefits to scaling your volume gradually that are in relation to your recovery capabilities. And I think it's a little bit of kind of maybe more of a fail-safe way to make sure that you're doing enough training and really paying attention to your training. But I think the progressive overload aspect of it comes with just scaling that average stress on a per meso basis over time, not necessarily from one workout to the next. Now, I don't want any of this to come across as I don't think it's good to, strive to get a little bit stronger every workout or, to do a little bit more each workout or anything like that. I think that that's still a good thing to shoot for. However, I just think that if you have the expectation that every single workout you need to do more to cause an adaptation to occur, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And I think it's much better to think about progressive overload as once an adaptation occurs, then I need to scale my training stress to facilitate further adaptations. And when you think about it like this, I think you're going to stress yourself out much less about, okay, my strength basically stayed the same from last week to this, but it's okay because how much strength adaptations do I really expect to make over the course of just 1 week? And the same thing can be said for muscle hypertrophy. Say you do about the same volume or the same total training stress as you did last week. Well, that's probably okay because how many muscular adaptations did you really make over the course of 1 week, right? So I think when you think about this, it takes the pressure off you a little bit and it allows you to just take those gains in strength kind of as they come, rather than thinking that you need to force them. And I think trying to force strength gains is just going to result in lackluster technique, a more poor stimulus to fatigue ratio on a per set basis, digging yourself into a hole of recovery. And all of this, I think, will prevent you from gaining muscle over the long run. All right. So try to think about progressive overload as scaling the total stress of your training as adaptations occur. And since adaptations for strength and hypertrophy take relatively a long amount of time on any given workout to your next workout, it doesn't make sense to stress out about it too much if, you're not seeing, particular strength gains or particular gains in volume or different things like that. But this doesn't mean that you shouldn't see those gains at any time in your program, like 1 year over the next. Your absolute training stress probably should go up a little bit, assuming adaptations have taken place. So hopefully this gives you a good framework for thinking about progressive overload and prevents you from making those mistakes that are very common when kind of misapplying this principle. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in that next one.